They say the colder you feel, the closer it is. And by the time your breath turns to frost, it's already inside you, beneath the bone-white silence of winter. In the ancient forests where snow swallows sound and shadow, there is something that does not sleep. Pile old stories from the Algonquian speaking tribes Ojibwe, Cree, Inuwan of a creature not born of the earth, but carved from famine and madness, a thing that does not hunt. It waits, it listens, it hungers. They call it the Wendigo. Not a beast in the way wolves are beasts, nor a spirit in the way gods are spirit. The Wendigo is what becomes of a man when he eats another, and then still feels hunger. By its legend is stitched into centuries of oral tradition, embroidered with the frostbitten whispers of trappers, fur traders, missionaries. Not always seen, never named aloud, but always there, just outside the firelight. You've heard it described before: antlers, gaunt limbs, a skull stretched over skin like old parchment. That version is safe. That version is Hollywood. The truth is much older. And far more unsettling. The Wendigo is not a creature that attacks you. It's the one that gets inside you. And once it does, your stomach may fill, but the hunger never stops. Tonight, we tell a tale that was not written, but remembered passed down in hushed tones, in homes that once locked the doors tight against something the wind carried. Because deep in the northern forests, they say it still walks, and it's hungry. Part 1. The Stranger Who Came with the Snow. It begins in 1871, in the settlement of Ratportishnau, called Canaralong, the icy edge of what is now Ontario, Canada. The town was small then, just a cluster of cabins, trading posts, and the dull clang of axe heads, splitting frozen birch. Winter came early that year. October brought snowfall that buried chimneys, and by November the lake had frozen over, thick and glassy, like a lid pressed over a secret. Food was tight. The traps were bare, and then came the stranger. He arrived just before dusk, bundled in furs too thick to see a face. No dogs, no sled, just a slow, heavy walk, as if the snow resisted him more than it should. P said his name was Arlen. He spoke little, ate less. The families took turns offering him shelter. One night here, another there. He always refused meat. He never seemed cold, and he never slept. Children said they heard him whispering to the fire, not by the fire, but to it, in a language none of them recognized. One girl said he never blinked. A boy claimed he woke to find Arlen standing at the edge of the bed, mouth open, breathing slow, and they dismissed it, just imagination, stirred by darkened hunger, until the howling began. It wasn't wolves. The men knew the difference. This was closer. A sound that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Like something crying out through lungs full of ice. 3 nights later, A hunter named Joseph Roy was found dead near the Trelawney's, body intact, untouched, but frozen stiff with his mouth wide open, as though he'd died. There were no tracks, no sign of a struggle, just frostbite around the edges of his tongue, as though something cold had touched him from the inside. That same morning, Arlen was gone. So was a boy from one of the cabins. They followed the trail boot prints heading east, where the forest thickens and the sun vanishes early. For half a mile, the prints were clear. Then, in a clearing lined with black spruce, they simply stopped. The snow was untouched beyond that point, but near the last footprint was a patch of ice. Not on the ground, but in it. A perfect circle, slick and smooth, as if something had melted the snow from below. There was a smell, too. The old woman who went with them said it was like tallow left too long in the sun, like meat spoiled by something that had once been alive, and then changed its mind. No one spoke the word. Not then. Not aloud. But some began locking their doors before sunset. Some left offerings in the trees, packed their things, and left, though the wind outside could kill a man in minutes. Why? Because what had taken Arlen and the boy was not a man. It was something far older, something that finds the hollow in you and fills it with cold. Part 2. The man who ate fire in 1907. Nearly 4 decades later and 200 miles north, the Wendigo came again. Or perhaps it had never left. In the remote mining camp of Fort Resolution, deep within the boreal forest, the winter had arrived without warning. The ice snapped shut over the river like a trap. Supply lines froze. Lanterns flickered and died in the wind. Among the miners was a man named Louis. He was not well liked, quiet, pale, always sweating, even in the cold. Said to be an educated man once. Be a teacher, or maybe a priest, but something in him had gone dim. He talked to no one, slept with his boots on, ate by himself. It was the fire that made the others whisper. Louis kept one burning at all times, even during the day, feeding it obsessively. Wood, cloth, sometimes even scraps of jerky or wax. P said the fire was the only thing that could hold it back. When asked what he meant, he would only answer, "You'll know. If it chooses you, you'll know." Then came the night. The fire went out. No one is sure how. The camp stoves failed. Lanterns sputtered. The coals in the hearth turned cold as stone. And Louis began to scream, not from pain, from hunger. He tore through the cook's quarters with both hands, shoving handfuls of raw flour into his mouth, chewing candle stubs, licking the walls for grease. His eyes rolled back in his head. His hands blistered from clawing at frozen tin. When the others tried to restrain him, he bit one man's wrist to the bone. They locked him in the storage shed, but the screaming didn't stop. It grew deeper, slower, like something else had taken hold of his lungs. When they opened the door the next morning, he was gone. The walls were scorched, the floor cracked with frost. But strangest of all, Along the beams of the roof, written in blackened soot, were words no one could read. Thin, spidery symbols that flaked off like burnt paper when touched. Some said it was a seizure, a madness brought on by isolation, malnutrition, fear. But others whispered the name again. They said Louis had fought it longer than most, that the fire wasn't madness, it was a ward, that the reason he slept in his boots was because once the Wendigo chooses you, it waits until you rest, until you close your eyes, until you think you're safe, and then it unbuttons your hunger, one breath at a time. Banda, the sight within the weed. Not because they believed, but because they were afraid of what they might start believing if they stayed. The forest swallowed the camp. The snow erased the trail. But some say, if you go there today and strike flint in the dead of night, you'll hear something exhale just behind you. And when you turn by, the fire goes out. Segment 3. The Doctor's Final Patient. The Wendigo legend persisted long after the frontier vanished. It slipped between centuries like cold, between floorboards appearing, not just in tales told by firelight, but in courtrooms, medical journals, and confessions scrawled in trembling hands. In 1920, a physician named Dr. Jonathan Hall was assigned to a sanatorium near Lake Laron, Saskatchewan. He was an Englishman, sent to manage the institution after the previous director had abruptly resigned an explanation. Only the urgent request that the building be sealed at night. Dr. Hall believed in science, in diagnosis, in reason. He dismissed the staff's talk of windwalkers, but then he met patient 43. No one knew her name. She had been found wandering barefoot in a blizzard, her feet black with frostbite, but somehow not dead. Her eyes were described as glassy, her speech nearly inaudible murmurs that sounded like breathing through broken reeds. She refused food. All food, but she gnawed at the walls, at the metal of her bed, at her own sleeves, long after they'd frozen stiff. Dr. Hall noted it all in his reports. Patient presents with extreme aversion to sustenance, exhibits signs of dissociation, insomnia, and intense shivering, regardless of heat, craves warmth, but shows no signs of hypothermia. She repeats one phrase, constantly. It wore my skin. He tried sedatives, restraints, warm broth, scripture, but nothing soothed her, until he brought fire into the room. In the scorched remains of his office, investigators found only ash and his journal. Blast, the last page, written shaky, burned at the edges read. There is no hunger like the one you inherit. The sanatorium was never rebuilt. Locals avoid the ruins, even now. They say snow refuses to settle there. That in winter, the trees bend away from the remains. That animals won't go near it, not even crows. And sometimes, in the wind, you can hear her voice, not calling, just breathing, because that's how it begins. Pure when you feel it, breathing with you. Part 4. What the elders buried before the settlers came. Before cabins and courts and sanatoriums, there were only the trees and the people who listened to them. Among the Algonquin, Cree, and Ojibwe peoples, the Wendigo was not just a warning. It was a law, a moral boundary etched into bone. Never take more than you need. Never abandon your kin. And never, ever eat the flesh of man, even to survive, because to do so was to invite something in. Not merely madness, not merely guilt, but transformation. Stories speak of a man named Mahingan, a hunter caught in a snowstorm that lasted 32 days. His wife and children perished early. Pea's dog later, but the snow was too deep to bury them. When Mahingan staggered back into the village, alone, thin as reeds, with frost caked into the hollows of his face, he said nothing, just collapsed. They tried to care for him, feed him, clothe him, but nothing stayed in his belly except snow. One elder watched him closely, silently. She said he walked too lightly for a man so starved, that he left no prints, that his eyes had gone dull, like bark soaked in oil. By at dawn, she gathered the villagers and told them, "He is no longer ours, he is Wendigo." They took him to the edge of the woods. They did not kill him, because that would not stop it. They did not pray over him, because it no longer heard prayer. They dug a pit beneath a cedar tree, lined it with ashen stone, and they buried him alive. Some screamed, others wept. By the elder only listened, and when it was done, she whispered, "He will not die, he will sleep." That tree still stands, they say. Its bark never peels, its roots twist like ribs, and even in the deepest cold, snow never touches its branches. In the spring, the elders leave gifts there, raw meat, coins, fire-charred cedar wood, not as offering, as warnings, because they say the Wendigo cannot be killed, only stool, only fit, just enough to keep it dreaming. And once in a while, when the hunger grows too loud, when a soul strays too far from firelight, it wakes and begins again. The Wendigo is more than myth. It is a hunger with memory, a silence with teeth. It takes the shape of those who are forgotten and feeds on what we cannot bear to remember. So, if the winter seems to still, if your fire burns too low, if something calls your name in the dark, don't answer. And whatever you do, don't look behind you.